Alright, welcome back to the tutorials. So in this set of tutorials we're going to talk about battles and battle management and whatnot. And in order to do that, you have to have a basic understanding of what kind of battles you're going to be having in your game. Right? So you have a few different kinds of battles, right? But we're going to keep it very simple actually for our game. We're just going to deal with things like intentional battles. In other words, these battles are sort of attached to your storyline kind of thing, so they're set up purposefully with intention. And then you have what I call intentionally random battles, because nothing in programming, in a sense, is truly random, in the sense that if you just had a screen, let me bring up our kingdom screen here for a second. So if you were going to place sort of NPC enemies in this screen randomly, let me zoom out here a little bit. You could have an enemy NPC ending up over here, on top of a house, in a house, right in the sign. You obviously don't want that, because then the NPC is just sort of stuck there and there's nothing you can do with it. And if you've played games long enough, I'm sure you've seen that actually happen, where you have an enemy stuck in a tree or something. That's because the programmers possibly at the time didn't quite rule out that space. So we're going to call ours intentionally random, meaning they're going to be randomized, but in a very intentional space, right? Like we want to exclude any space here or here. Does that make sense? All right. So let me close this out, because we're not going to work with the kingdom right now. We are going to work with load game, and we want to talk a little bit about, of course, variables, right? Because that's where we pretty much always start, is in variables. And we do have to do a little bit of cleanup here first. Remember, you're always coding, testing, trying, and if you're a programmer like me, you do a little bit of cleanup at the end. Whereas I know there are a lot of programmers who are very meticulous throughout the whole process. That's great. I tend to like to see if something works before I commit to the cleanup part of it. So here's where we're going to clean up a little bit. We've got a couple of Bob external events here. Let's go ahead and let's add another grouping. Okay, where'd you go, group? There we go. And let's go ahead and let's bring it up here, and let's group Bob's stuff together. So we're going to call this Bob's external events, and we're going to just move these over, drag them over so they're underneath. That's good. Next thing I want to do is, we don't need this dialog management here if you have it. We've got a dialog manager underneath game management, and this dialog manager is the one that actually has the variables in it. This one is actually empty, so if you have this extra one like I do, you can go ahead and right click on it, and we'll just delete it, get rid of it. We don't need it. The other thing is this. We have in our inventory management external event here, we've got chest variables mixed in with our regular inventory ones. We should probably pull that apart. So we can right click chest inventory management, add a sub event here, and just do a copy and paste for anything that's chest oriented here, right? So let's cut that actually, paste it in, cut, paste, and does this have to be done in the sense that will your code just cease to work if you don't do this? No, but realize that, again, the more organized you are now, the easier your game creation is going to be later on in the future, right? Because we're pushing for creating code that we can use in games in the future, right? That's why we're really taking our time. Okay. Now that we've cleaned up a little bit here, let's start getting some variables going for our battles. Okay. First thing we want to do is we want to create a new grouping here underneath Bob, and let's drag it over. And we're going to call these Bob's stats. And let's right-click Bob's stats, and let's add a sub-event underneath that. And Bob's stats is essentially going to be things like his health, his damage, and his defense. We're just going to work with those three right now. But if you were making a more robust game, you would do things like you could do things like strength, charm, vitality, whatever, dexterity, you know, all those kind of things that you've seen in other video games. You would place that in here. But we are just going to add variable, global variable. We're just going to keep it simple. And we're going to do Bob's stats dot health. And we'll set Bob's health right now equal to 10. Okay, and then I'm going to copy and paste it. And now we're going to create Bob's stats dot damage. And we're going to set Bob's damage equal to 1. Whoops. There we go. Now this is the damage that Bob can currently deal. And the reason why we want to make this a variable is so that we can have some play room with it, right? We can add modifiers and multipliers and things like that. All right, and I'm going to copy the damage one and paste in. And now I'm going to say Bob's stats dot defense. All right. So Bob's got some stats here going on. And we're going to come down here to our management sections that we've got here. Let's see. I want to add to this. We're going to add another grouping here. Right click and add a group. And we're going to call this one Battle Management. And let's add a new sub-event underneath this. Now, this battle management, you go in coding with a plan as best as you can. And of course, your game might evolve even as you're coding. So we might add to this, we might subtract to this at times. But for right now, we're just going to keep track of a couple of key things. Okay, key stats. So let's start adding our variables here. These are global variables. And we're going to use bmanager for battle manager. And we're going to say bmanager.begin. We're going to set that equal to 0. Now bmanager.begin is a trigger variable, right? It's going to trigger the fact that we've entered a battle. Now again, if you're doing intentional battles, right, where it's attached to the storyline, this is where a trigger variable like begin comes in handy, because then you could trigger that variable and load a whole bunch of stats that you need for that particular battle. But if you're just doing sort of intentionally random encounters, something similar to like Legend of Zelda, right, kind of thing, where you're just kind of running around the screen shooting enemy NPCs, you don't have to trigger this begin battle. That'll make more sense as we move along. Okay, let's right click and copy this. Let's paste it, and let's also have, of course, we need a way in and a way out, right? We're going to say bmanager dot end. And that's going to trigger all the variables we have to unload, maybe objects we have to destroy. Basically, it's going to close up our battle and get everything back to where it needs to be for us to move forward. All right. So we've got begin, we've got end. I think I'm going to stop there for this one, okay? Because in the next tutorial we're going to have to do some additional talking, and I'm going to try to get us moving a little bit here too in terms of actually creating something on the screen with a little more excitement.